Mesdames et messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, veuillez accueillir, please welcome Catherine Bryant, Laureen Van Breen, Adriana Bora, en conversation avec, in conversation with, Nicolas Maille. Mais d'abord, voici votre hôte. But first, here is your host, Jacques Rajotte.
Yes, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you all for being with us for this panel. It is my pleasure to introduce you to the third panel of our inspiring series, AI in Action. And the title of this panel is AI Against Slavery. Under the Modern Slavery Act, corporations from around the world are required to file reports. To file reports around, their how they monitor modern slavery to their supply chain. But the challenge really under the Act is how do you monitor all of these reports that are being filed from around the world and try really to assess what is the current situation with modern slavery. So a simple solution, why not AI? To collect all of those data, analyze them, and report back to those who are responsible for the monitoring of the Act. So this is one great example of a simple AI solution that can contribute to solve a pressing social issue, in this case, modern slavery. So today I have the pleasure of welcoming a panel that will be moderated by Nicolas Maille. Nicolas is the founder of the Future Society, and he's also a member and a contributor to many AI-related committees, both at the national and at the international level. So I will turn to you, Nicolas, to introduce us to our panel.
Well, hi, everyone. Thanks a lot, Jacques, for the kind introduction. And let me thank you and congratulate you, as well as the entire team at ICEMAI, for the amazing work you have done to prepare this plenary despite the pandemic and organize such an engaging experience for us despite the pandemic. So thanks a lot and congratulations. It's a real delight for me to be with all the panelists tonight to talk about Project AIMS, which stands for AI Against Modern Slavery, which we are all passionate about, which really is a project that tries to advance AI for social good, responsible AI for social good, to try and help eradicate something that we all care about and we are all fight against. So my name is Nicolas. I have the privilege of leading the Future Society, which is a small but yet global think and do tank, which mission is really to help advance the responsible adoption of AI and other emerging tech. We try and do things a bit differently, at least we try, and some of the way in which we do things differently is to try and look at all times and reconcile questions of the what with questions of the how. They are inextricably connected. Long and short term, they are inextricably connected. Opportunities and challenges, and thinking while doing, and finally trying to be open and actively engage society. We are a civil society organization, and for us, civic engagement is critical. I am very honored to have with us today three fantastic civil society and philanthropic leaders. We have with us today Catherine Bryant, who is the lead of European engagement at Walk Free. We have Laureen Van Breen, the managing director of Wikirate, and Adriana Bora from our team at the Future Society. Before I ask three of them to introduce themselves a bit more, and right after which we'll get into the panel conversation, let me just say a few words about Project AIMS. So the project is led by the Future Society, but really builds upon the fantastic work of Walk Free, the Business and Human Rights Resource Center, and of Wikirate. And the goal is to develop an AI algorithm leveraging computational linguistic as well as NLP machine learning methods to help read and assess statements that corporations have to publish on a yearly basis to honor their compliance requirements vis-a-vis the Modern Slavery Act in the UK and now in Australia and in the future in more countries. I think that Canada is one good example of a country envisaging this. And so with Project AIMS, what we're trying to do is really help bring to life and provide a scalable open source tool to analyze those statements, therefore boosting compliance and holding businesses and governments to account in a better way. And in doing so, trying to implement the best practices in responsible and ethics by design. That's it for the intro. Catherine, I'll leave you the floor to start a quick intro and then we'll get into a conversation after the others have introduced themselves.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Nico. And it's a real privilege to be with you here this evening for a rather chilly London. As Nico said, my name is Catherine Bryant. I am lead of European engagement at Walk Free. For those of you who may not be familiar with Walk Free, we're an international anti-slavery organisation based in Western Australia, headquartered in Perth, although I'm based here in London. We're a foundation that was funded and founded by a West Australian businessman called Andrew Forrest. And our overarching goal, our mission, is to eradicate modern slavery within a generation. And we aim to do this by generating the highest quality, high impact research, by advocating for change with business, government, civil society and faith leaders, as well as engaging directly with business and government to try and drive change. We also do some funding for some local grassroots organisation at the coalface of these forms of exploitation. My role at Walk Free is to spearhead our pieces of work, both in research and advocacy, to hold governments to account. And I do this through the Global Slavery Index, assessing government responses, but also more and more looking at the regulation and legislation that governments are releasing to hold businesses to account. And just end by saying I'm super excited to join you all today, and I look forward to this conversation.
Thanks a lot, Catherine. Laurie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nico, and thank you all for joining our session today. I'm joining from Berlin, Germany today, also really excited to be here. So Wikirate is an organization that has developed the largest open source registry of ESG data in the world to date. We have nearly 1 million data points on over 55,000 companies. And this is a growing resource that has we've been starting to develop it in 2016, and the growth has been exponential. Really what the idea came from was that if you want to compare companies on their performance in terms of their financial performance, it's quite easy to get that overview, to get that aggregate, and to be able to see what companies are doing in comparison to their peers. But if you want to get that same kind of overview when it comes to environmental or social data, you really cannot get that kind of overview unless you have the resources to pay for it. And so the idea really is that we are all company stakeholders. We should all have access to this kind of comparison. And so we started to bring all this information together in one place, making it freely available for all. So I'll leave it at that, as I'm sure we'll get into lots of the other things in just a bit.
Well, thanks, Laurie and Adriana, and I want to acknowledge, so I'm calling in from Paris, you're calling from Adelaide in Australia. It's very early in the morning for you, and I think your presence there is one more symbol of our dedication and commitment, and your dedication and commitment to this noble cause. So thanks for joining, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nico. Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you so much for having me here today. It's a huge honor to be able to present the work that we're doing to the audience. My name is Adriana Bora. I'm an AI policy researcher and project manager at the Future Society. And as Nico presented at the Future Society, we're working hard to advance the ethical governance of artificial intelligence. And by doing so, we position ourselves at the intersection between mitigating the risk of AI while trying to really capture the opportunities that AI can bring to the society. So lately, as part of the team, I'm focusing more on the latter part of our work, and I'm here today as the project manager of Project AIMS, where we're working towards the achievement of SDG 8, particularly target 8.7 of our Agenda 2030. And this target really calls upon states to take immediate and effective measures to eradicate forced labor, modern slavery, and human trafficking, and to secure the prohibition and the elimination of the worst form of child labor, including the recruitment and use of child soldier by 2025. So when we look at those two very soon to come deadlines, we really see the importance of scaling and accelerating the work that we're doing. And therefore, we have a great opportunity to use AI in doing so.
All right, thanks a lot, Adriana. Thanks for introducing what modern slavery means in practice in the context of the SDGs, which is one of the moral compass and operational compasses of the Global Partnership on AI. Well, let's dive right in. Let's talk a bit more about Project AIM. So how did it come to be? What are the objectives? And who are the partners involved? And I'm going to start with Lauren.
Yes, thank you so much. So the really what happened was in 2015, the UK government passed a law that required companies to start to report on what they're doing to combat modern slavery in their own operations as well as their supply chains. And that is when Walk Free and Wikirate connected and said, we really should be keeping an eye on what is coming out, what are the reports, and what are we seeing on the part of companies in these reports. So in 2016, our collaboration started, which is when the first reports started coming out. And for the past years, we've really been using a citizen science approach. What I mean with that is that we're getting the help of volunteers and students to do the systematic assessment. So we use the Home Office guidance to develop the metric questions that we use to assess and really get to the standardized data set so that we can start to compare how companies report in these different documents. What has been great about this approach is that we could already scale it a little bit compared to what you can do with a research team of an NGO. But now that we're getting to Project AIMS, we're really taking that to the next level. So I'll leave it at that, just in terms of the background.
Okay, thanks a lot. Adriana, what would you add to this first description?
Well, thank you, Lorraine. And here I would like to talk a bit about a different angle of the journey for Project AIMS and to connect it to back to being in university and the role of academia in this. As a student, I was curious about the use of data against modern slavery. And in this research, it was a natural progression from econometrics to machine learning. And the reason why I switched over looking at machine learning is because I realized there is this incredible data out there, but it comes in format of a text. And those are the modern slavery reports. And I wanted to take this corpus and apply machine learning and general topic modeling to try to make sense of what companies are talking about and how can we see the relationship with industry or any other variables. In doing so, I was lucky to be able to have an internship at the Walk Free Foundation. And the researchers there have been very kind to allow me to present to them my preliminary research results. And their feedback was that this will make a really good paper and it will be very interesting to read. But what the community really needs at this point is to create tangible solutions, something that the researchers can use in their day-to-day work. And therefore, I built a prototype of Project AIMS. Going back to school, I had to defend this thesis. And in the jury, there was Nicholas, who was also my teacher in AI governance. And I can say that I was extremely happy and honored to receive such a positive feedback from the Future Society, Walk Free, Wikirate, and for them to invest their trust and take that prototype to where Project AIMS is today. So thank you very much.
Well, you're most welcome, you're most welcome. And Catherine, please add to the essential description.
Of course. So just, I suppose in its kind of simplest form, the Project AIMS is a collaborative effort between Walk Free, Wikirate, the Future Society, and Business and Human Rights Resource Centre. And its ultimate goal is to develop a tool using machine learning that can analyse the content of the reports produced by business under the UK Modern Slavery Act and also other reporting requirements as these are being developed. It's about unlocking that content and providing that information to provide that transparency. However, for me, it's always about more than this. It's not just about unlocking that content and the use of AI to do that. It's about speeding up the analysis so that we're better able to hold people to account, hold business to account, and to drive changes in corporate behavior. I always want to kind of bring it back to the 40.3 million people in modern slavery, making sure that by improving transparency, we're able to protect those that are most hidden within supply chains, those most vulnerable to exploitation. And that's the real reason that we're doing and have this Project AIMS.
Well, I would like to go back to Adriana, and please, Lorraine or Catherine, react to if you have to add some stuff. But practically, what does AI play as a role in the project, and what came into consideration to develop this this algorithmic pathway?
Thank you, Nicholas. So just as Catherine mentioned, we were looking for a scalable and sustainable solution. And this is the role, very briefly put, that AI place in this. I have to mention that this is not a silver bullet. So what we're really trying to do here is try to find a solution that will allow researcher or any stakeholder that is interested in analyzing this corpus or individual statements to not have to focus on the little tasks that can be easily automatized, but rather to be able to use their full cognitive capabilities to do the real interesting part of research. While we were designing and developing this AI system, we really paid particular attention to a few aspects. So first of all, of course, there was the data, the availability and the quality of data, but also as we are building upon the previous work described from Wikirate, we also have some grantor data, some already annotated and labeled data. And here we're paying particular attention, again, of how much data we have, how much we'll need in the future, and what's the quality of that. Secondly, we were really paying attention to the competencies. And here to make sure that in the team we have the right competencies to take this challenge on, but very importantly, to have the right mentors and advisors around us in this journey. And thirdly, and very important, were the ethical aspects of developing this tool. So we had to think about how is this data, can it be biased in any way? Can we generate any unfairness in this process towards our subjects, which are the companies whose reports we are analyzing? And most importantly, how can we make this process transparent and accountable and avoid misuse? So just a quick point here to mention that while developing this, we were extremely lucky and happy to have this multi-stakeholder approach to this problem, because we were able to build on years of experience and work that Wikirate and Walk3 and Business Human Rights Research Center have been doing, and therefore, which aims to be very unbiased and very fair. So with the AI, we have the responsibility of taking this to an exponential scale while still respecting the same principles. And in terms of transparency, we have, and we are continuing to take very close note of everything that we're doing. So on top of the open source tool that we are going to publish, we're going to also publish open source handbook showing everything that we've done. Thank you.
Lauren, Catherine, anything to add on that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, what is actually one of the things I love most about the project is that, as you also heard from Adriana, from the beginning, it's been a very realistic view of what AI is and what it can do and what the purpose really is of it in the project. So there's a symbiotic relationship between AI and people. And outside of the tech community, our minds quickly go to, we've all seen the movies, AI takes over and all this kind of more crazy stuff, if you will. And maybe that's in our future. I can't tell you, but what I can tell you is that right now, that's not the reality. And that's also not what we're looking for here. And so from the get-go, we've built it, or it's being built in the way that it can really complement what people are doing. And it's really kind of, a step to help the people do their job better.
Yeah, we're used to saying that AI is neither artificial nor intelligent. It's collective, at times it's powerful. And so it's really how we engineer the collective and augmented intelligence out of a complete social-technical system that we can algorithmically augment social-technical system. That's what we're trying to do here. We'll discuss, we'll have a point on the collaborative aspect, which I think is critical. But Catherine, anything to add?
Just very, very briefly, just to pick up on one point Adriana said around the importance of transparency, and that's a key consideration for us. I really commend the development of the handbook, which I think is going to be really important for others in this space to improve the kind of the scalability and the ability to replicate this type of project. In particular, the way the handbook is written, it'll be available for people who are technical experts in AI, those people who work in modern slavery who might be looking at applying this technology to other projects, and also policy makers as well. So that's one thing I think that's super important from this project. Yeah,
that's a critical aspect. We also want to be informing policy design and legislative work. We will discuss that. That's a very important aspect in terms of all-encompassing. Let me turn back to you, Lauren. In your work, what is the role of disclosure in driving this corporate action? And how can AI facilitate that to concretely, practically? And are there any other examples of AI being currently used to drive change in company behaviors through a disclosure?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question, Nico. And really what I would say is to start to hold companies accountable, we have to start by counting. And what I mean to say with that is that over the past decades, we've seen transparency rhetoric improve, we've seen sustainability reporting improve. But really what is actually happening is that we're seeing a couple of leaders take fantastic steps in improving their practices. But on an industry level, not much has changed, despite the transparency improvements that we've seen. So what we really need to do is have accountability at scale. And we need AI and those kinds of technologies to help us do that. To make it practical, from the Modern Slavery Act, we're getting about 16,000 reports published every financial year. Now, in the past 4 years, we've hit about 1,500 statements that we've been able to assess. And that has been a large effort, the largest actually so far. So what I'm trying to say is we cannot scale without that AI. And so I think that's really what is so interesting. At the same time, I would just like to kind of mention that critics will actually say, you know, what's the use of seeing what is in these statements? We've seen the case with Bohu just a couple of months ago. What is in these statements? Can we really rely on it anyway? Isn't it just kind of lip service? And while that might be the case, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. And I would also say that assessing these documents is really just one piece of the puzzle. Starting to then bring in worker reports and comparing the commitments of companies in their disclosures to what is actually happening on the ground, that is really where we can see and promote change. So I think that is really what the role is here. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. It's really part of the world of non-financial data disclosure, which has a lot to bring to accountability and to driving change towards delivering on the sustainable development goals at large. Adriana, Catherine, anything to add on that particular aspect of the role of AI in disclosure and the role of disclosure in accountability of businesses and governments?
Just on the role of disclosure, I 100% agree with Lorraine that, you know, mandatory reporting is just one very small part of this puzzle that we're trying to solve. So alongside what we do in terms of assessing these statements and unlocking the content within those statements, we also engage directly with businesses to share good practice and actually use the content within the statements as a tool to do that. And that's good practice on, you know, investigating risks in supply chains, how to do remediation properly, how to do due diligence, so on and so forth. And we believe that by driving that better practice, you then drive better reporting. So ultimately, the goal for us is disclosure to reflect better action, not disclosure for disclosure's sake. So that's something that's really important for us, that this is not just about releasing beautifully made reports around what companies are doing, but actually driving concrete action.
Okay.
And
Adriana? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick point on the examples part of the question. I think there are more and more examples out there of how AI can be used to unlock this accountability for other non-financial reporting areas, like such as green growth, finance, or just sustainability at large. But I would like to add a different angle to the use of AI in this particular supply chain transparency fight, and to say that we can see that there are more tools now available to assist companies in their assessment of risk of modern slavery in their supply chain. So they can use the knowledge that is now being generated, such as Catherine said, from different stakeholders on what risks to look for or incidents, and use all this data and then fuel with AI. They can see the risk related to their clients, investors, transactions, third parties, and the footprint of their products. So then they can AI can help them to create the content that then we use AI to analyze at scale.
And well, back to you, Catherine, and closing the loop vis-a-vis governments and going back to the Modern Slavery Act. What is the role of government in this assessment and this role in the use, if I may say, of AI in that context?
Thanks, Nico. So governments are obviously the starting point for this project. We were looking to assess the effectiveness of legislation and what governments are doing to hold businesses to account. And we've seen globally there has been an increasing trend to increase regulation, increase legislation with governments holding businesses and also starting to hold themselves to account through looking at their public procurement processes and actually applying some of these legislations, these mandatory reporting requirements to their own processes. So with this increased regulation, we've seen things such as obviously the UK Modern Slavery Act, which we've spoken about at length. There's also the Australian Modern Slavery Act, which follows a very similar template around mandatory reporting. Companies have just started to report actually in the last week on that. And then there's also been a bit of a shift across Europe to looking at mandatory human rights due diligence. Very likely to be an EU directive on that next year. And obviously we have the French duty of vigilance law. So there are a lot of transparency requirements, a lot of reporting requirements for business that governments are putting in place. And the result of this is, as Lorraine's already mentioned, are these tens of thousands of statements each year being produced, which have little value unless we can actually unlock the information that sits within them. And governments recognize this, that they're putting this legislation in place so that they can be transparent, and they are encouraging businesses to be transparent about what's happening in their direct operations and supply chains. And they're getting increasing pressure to do so from consumers who are asking and demanding for this information, and also increasingly, and I think is going to be really important in the coming years, from investors to try and disclose what's happening in their investment portfolios around risk of exploitation. And we've seen government has been really responsive to this, not just enacting the legislation, but improving upon it. In the UK, for example, the UK government released a review recently and have committed to putting in place a central registry where they're going to house all these statements. Australia has one already that has some statements on it as of last week. And that's going to be really critical to facilitate our analysis, to make it a lot easier for researchers such as us to access those. And I think there's some really important developments there. And ultimately, governments are going to be really interested in this project because we're going to make their lives a little bit easier in terms of unlocking that transparency, particularly where they have some requirements to actually report back to Parliament, as is the case in Australia.
Yeah, so this registry and the pathway towards this modern slavery registry and the ways in which things are standardized, and we'll discuss that made machine readable, is going to be key to, in a way, leverage and capture the potential of this financial or non-financial data disclosure. Adriana, Lorraine, anything to add on that?
Sure. Just a quick point, building on exactly what you were saying, the importance of machine readability. And as Catherine is saying, governments play a crucial role. And to be able for them in the long run to have this process a bit easier to monitor and evaluate those legislation, what we think will be ideal is for them to add in their design and in their vision of this legislation, this element of the use of AI. So for the governments that already have legislation or they're thinking to do so, modern slavery or any other non-financial reporting will be really great if they can encourage, if not require, companies to publish their reports in machine readability format, just the way in some jurisdictions they do for the financial reporting. And this way they will ensure that this process of evaluation will be done a lot stronger and a lot faster.
Yeah, we tend to forget how much this project is an open data one. But it's AI-ready open data questions. Open data challenges are not new, but they are asked in a new intensity in the age of this algorithmic potential. But please, Lorraine, sorry I interrupted you. Please go ahead.
No worries. I was really just going to say, besides echoing what Catherine and Adriana have been saying, I do also want to say that engaging with governments on this kind of topics is not without its challenges. So when we use the buzzwords, AI, blockchain, you get their attention, you definitely grab it. But to keep them engaged when you start to get into the nitty gritty about, what separator do we use? Is it a comma? Is it a semicolon? What is machine readability? What do we even mean by that? What formats are there? It's those type of things that are not very exciting to that audience. And so keeping them engaged on the things that seem very boring in a way, not to us, but to those audiences. It's really, that's where we can really have an impact, or the legislation can have an impact. And so it's really, how do we have these conversations with them. It's something we really also need to be conscious of and think more about, and actually get better at, to really keep them engaged in what we need from them.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Let us drill into this question of the challenges. We never claimed that Project AIM was going to be a silver bullet or a magical wand. Neither did we claim that it was going to work first shot. It's a cycle, it's a process, it's changing the world one small step at a time and leveraging AI, responsive AI for social good, one small step at a time. And so maybe starting with Adriana, in your practice, more than your views, what are the main challenges of Project AIM, and what are we confronting right now, both in the context of the current developments and downstream in the context of the forthcoming deployment?
Well, thank you. Indeed, we are closely evaluating our challenges, and we had the chance to co-write a paper on what the challenges we have been facing so far, called Digital Insights into Modern Slavery Report, where we present those challenges and some recommendations for governments and businesses. And what we're trying to say that is to make the case for that machine readability formal requirements that we mentioned before. So the reason for that is that in Project AIMS, we are not facing any challenge that any of you that ever worked with a PDF text extraction hasn't yet had to face. So first of all, the challenge started with the gathering and accessing the data. And here, again, the collaborative nature of this project made this challenge a bit easier on us, but I'm sure not very easy on Wikirate and Business and Human Rights Research Center, who for the last 4 years, they've been trying to find what companies subject to those laws, where do they publish the report, and collecting those reports. So we got that data. But once we got the data, we needed to access the URLs in which those reports were stored, and then we have the HTML and PDF formats. And while we only managed to scrape around 75% of those URLs because of expired links or blocking scripting issue and so on, when we try now to access the text and put it in a really structured format that then can facilitate the building of the algorithm, we see that while HTML presents some challenges that are a bit easier to fix, while with PDF, as a lot of you I know are very familiar, the different formats of PDF, the columns, the different fonts, and again, the overuse of infographics that when you try to scribe adds so much noise to your data. But when you combine all of this with what we haven't expected, for instance, were not great writing practices, such as having those images without a title, without being referenced in text, without being summarized in text, it just makes this entire evaluation and text structuring a bit more difficult. So those are the challenges we'll be facing so far. But what we're really paying lots of attention now, and we're going to spend the next few months doing so, are the challenges associated with our grant through data. The labeling data, we know how crucial this is in building a good model, and this is what we are really focusing our efforts for the next few months.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Lauren, what would you add in terms of the challenges we're confronting, both in the development and then deployment, particularly from obviously the Wikirate perspective?
No, exactly. I mean, the challenges that Adriana mentions, we've been running into for years and have been actually talking about for a while. So we're really happy to have more people help us advocate for these items. But we are also a key example of a challenge that we have with the Modern Slavery Act is that the labeling of which entity is covered by what statements and what time period. So you will see a statement that they have to report by financial year, but they will say it's our financial year 2018-19. This is our 2020 statement, and it's signed in 2019. You know, which year do you pick at this point? So having some kind of system to decide who goes in what bucket of years, periods. Another thing is the entity label. So which entities are covered by this legal document? Some might put a list of subsidiaries, which is great. Some might just say all our subsidiaries. Some might spell their name a little bit different in the document than what you would see on their website. So it's really incredibly hard to just figure out those very simple things. And it relates to another big issue that we have, which Adriana has also experienced, is between databases, you will get different names for the same company. So when I say Coca-Cola, we all think of the one. But when it comes to what Coca-Cola actually is as an entity, it is many legal entities and it has many different brands. And so it uses many different names, and different reporting goes under different names. And so figuring out what names match between different databases is incredibly hard. And so that is also a very big challenge in this project.
Yeah, and it speaks to the need, again, to standardize the ways in which these data are produced and gathered and labeled. And that's why this modern slavery registry are so important. And it also speaks to the fact that there are different audiences for this statement. One is people like you and me, including lawyers, practitioners, who are going to humans reading through these documents, but also machines. So we have to be able to address these two audiences through the standardization. Catherine, anything you would like to add from your perspective?
Yeah, I'd actually just like to pick up on the last thing you said there. It's really interesting having been, an unhealthy knowledge of these statements over the last 4 years, and then actually now looking at how we can apply AI to looking at them as well. So, for example, we know that the primary audience for these are humans. And so infographics and having them to be visually appealing is actually really important to engage with your audience. And we definitely don't want to say to business, don't make these visually appealing, because ultimately they also want consumers to be looking at them and kind of being engaging and interested in the content of these statements. So one of the things we've been doing is working with policymakers to try and really nuance what our recommendations are, which are, make sure that companies have got their kind of beautiful outlined statements, but also making sure there is a format that goes with that is then machine readable, which then facilitates the machine readability and the number of statements that we can then look at. And then beyond that, I just want to emphasize the critical points that we've all been talking about, in terms of access, year reporting periods. For me, one of the key things is the lack of a central list of companies that should be reporting, because without that list, it's impossible for us to actually know which companies we should be holding to account. But I could talk about the challenges for a long time, but I'll stop there.
If I may just add one more point before we move on. I would say also there is the idea that, and Adriana already kind of alluded to that at the start, which is as a human, we can process many bits of information at once. And an AI will be binary. So we're looking at one thing. If that's not the case, then the next thing. And so context, when you're assessing paragraphs of text, is incredibly hard. When they name audits, does that mean that they actually are doing audits? You will see company statements that have labels saying our audit program, and then it describes everything but any kind of audit. And so having the AI understand that context and that nuance is going to be a major challenge as well.
That's a great point. Well, last question before we take a few questions from the audience. I guess that one of the reasons why we are here within the Global Partnership on AI, why in a way the project has been considered as, in a way, probably a bit symbolical and aligned with the mission of GPAI, is because of its collaborative nature. It's really a collaborative initiative, much like what we are planning and actually doing within the Global Partnership. So I'd like you to each speak a little bit to that in terms of what are the benefits of our collaborative structures, and what each of the partners contributes to the project, and more importantly, what lessons are we learning from collaborating with each other from different organizations with their own boundaries, missions, capability, building questions, and so on. And I'll start with maybe Lauren.
Yeah, of course. So I can give you just a little bit in a nutshell, like from a data perspective, what is so great of working with these three organizations. Really, we're all bringing something different to the table. So, for instance, the Future Society, they have so much expertise in developing this AI solution. They're coming with the right questions. Then on Wikirate's side, we have all the experience in aggregating a standardized data set. What is the kind of logic that we need to be using? And then Walk Free really knows how to use that data. Who is the audience that we're actually talking to? What is the end goal? So often we gather data sets or have beautiful tools and they sit idle. And so it's really great to bring all those pieces together and really fine tune that together. So in terms of what Wikirate is doing within the project, a little bit more about our role. At the moment, it's really helping to discuss, what is the logic of the assessment? How do we make these judgments? Because there's so many things that we judge and that are part of the methodology, which are not always that explicit. And so making everything very explicit and very simple is a big part of what we're doing now, as well as Adriana mentioned, we are helping with the ground truth data set. We're using what we already have, and we're using extra assessments to really have a good solid base from which we can start to train this algorithm. In terms of
go ahead.
Sorry. In terms of medium term, we're looking at integrating the tool into the platform. And so then we're really coming to that company matching question that I mentioned earlier and really trying to figure out a system that accounts for all those complexities. And then even later stage, we're looking at engaging the volunteer community that we have in verifying what the algorithm is doing and then feeding that back so that the algorithm can continue to improve. And so it's all of these layers that we're going to be working through in the next years.
Yeah, I cannot emphasize enough how, in a way, we are all obsessed about the quality of the ground truth data. Because if we miss that, we are going to, not even from a responsible, also for responsible AI adoption, but simply the performance of what we're trying to do. So happy to hear that. It's very important. Catherine, what are your main aspects, main learnings out of this collaborative framework that we're trying to lead?
I think you can tell that we all work together very well just by watching this session. I hope that comes across. I think collaboration is key, and for us it's about recognizing each other's organization strengths. And Lorraine did a great job of running through where we kind of all fit in with each other. On our side, Walk Free, definitely, obviously, we come from the content knowledge and the expertise on looking at anti-slavery initiatives, but also, as Lorraine says, that translating the research into action and working with policymakers to come up with concrete recommendations. I think from my perspective, the one, and I mentioned this earlier, the driving force is the need for transparency and for creating greater transparency in supply chains. And that's kind of where the original partnership with Wikirate came from. And then when we met Adriana and the Future Society, being able to maximize and increase and improve upon that transparency, it was just such a logical next step that's obviously where that partnership then fit into this overarching group. And I think for us, it's just about learning from each other's expertise. I learned so much from both Lorraine and Adriana every single day on working on this project, but then also just recognizing and building upon each other's strengths.
Okay, so Adriana, and then we'll take a few questions from the audience.
Well, thank you. Just to add to what's been said, simply the Future Society's role is to bring the technical expertise in building that and the AI policy so much needed around building an AI tool. But what I want to say is that we're really not building this AI tool in a vacuum. And I think one of the main lessons of this project is that I hope Project AIM stands like a really good example for something that we hear so often in panels: multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary, diverse approach to problem solving. And as it's been emphasized quite a few times during this panel, we really have a collective intelligence approach to design the technical roadmap for this challenge. So when you look at the team of Project AIMS, you see expertise from natural language processing, computational linguistic, data science, law, politics, AI policy. And then when you zoom out a little bit and you see the other stakeholders that we are engaging with and that are helping us in developing this tool, we have civil society, private sector, the government, philanthropy, academia involved in this. And another element or dimension to this is that if you would be to take a screenshot of our team meetings, and as this panel is a good example of this, as we are all zooming in from different corners of the world. The team is really spread across the globe, and we have very diverse experiences and cultures coming into this, but also a very good gender balance in designing this solution. So we really hope that many other AI projects will be designed with those diverse views.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think that we're trying to, so some people at times feel a bit dubious over whether the global partnership should focus on AI for good projects or focus on the big governance reset. I think that there is room for both. I think that what we're trying to do here is create a pathway to algorithmically augment civil society, algorithmically augment legislators and public administrators through its modern registry, because there is a virtuous loop that we should get into where responsible adoption of AI creates capacity to govern AI, particularly within the public sector. Let me take Mike O'Sullivan's question. His question is the following. AI for civilians, such as facial recognition, might be useful for finding people, including in modern slavery. But obviously, there are also privacy concerns and risks for people. How do you approach benefits versus risk of AI in that context with respect to modern slavery? So it's around facial recognition technologies. Anyone would like to say something on that?
Yeah, maybe I can just have a start. So one of the things I think is very telling is that in San Francisco, facial recognition technology has been temporarily banned. I think when the people that are developing this technology do not want it in their own backyard, that's a good sign of where we're at with how well we can actually deal with the ethical implications of that technology. So generally, we have not been very strong proponent of using this kind of technology. For instance, what you will also hear is factories that have facial recognition technology at the entrance of the factory. The idea really being that they can kind of see who comes in and they can reward employees. What it also means is that they know exactly who is coming and going when. They can actually combine that with technology from the government, whether these workers have been in demonstrations, and fire the ones that went to demonstrate. So it's actually something that we see as quite a dangerous technology at the moment. Something that is, for instance, much more simple and could be used for the good of workers is air quality monitor. You know, it's something that looks at health and safety. It's much cheaper. It's much easier to install, but that's not what we're seeing. So it really puts question marks with what are these companies actually looking for when they use these technologies. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
I might like to add, yes, I would like to add an example here, where there is this publication coming out from Tech Against Trafficking, where they map out the technology solution against modern slavery. They look around 300 technology solutions in this domain. And one of them, if I'm not mistaken, is called Find the Face. And this application is using AI to find people that gone missing after displacement. So we know that modern slavery is very linked to vulnerability, and people that are migrating, especially in the context of displacement, are very vulnerable to be trafficked and to be abused. So what this technology does is saying, if you cannot find one of your relatives, send us a picture of this person. And we're going to run this picture through a publicly available data set of face, and we're going to try to see if we can identify this person. Now, and this, I have to go and check this, but it is this mitigation between risk and challenge is about the way they're collecting that data and the way they're designing that solution. So if they indeed just use public data and they design that solution without including any bias, then I think that would be a good example of use of facial recognition technology. But we will be good to go and ask them to give us a bit more details on their methodology and transparency of that solution.
Yeah.
Okay. Catherine,
Just very briefly, I'll add something, and then we can have more time for other questions. I think, just from my perspective, like AI, like any technology, is obviously a tool that can be used in kind of good ways, for want of a better way of putting it, and in bad ways as well. So for me, it's about the kind of underlying guiding framework that sits with that, and not just thinking about it in terms of ethics, but actually a human rights-based approach to this, making sure that we're doing no harm to the individuals that we're actually trying to assist, in this case, victims of modern slavery. I think there's some examples where tech can be used. So for example, we've seen some social media platforms being used to facilitate the sexual exploitation of minors, and also being used to buy and sell maids in the Middle East. It's very well documented. So I think for me, it's all coming back to kind of the regulation and making sure there is a human rights-based framework that guides those decisions of how these tools will be used.
Well, thanks a lot. Producers, I don't know how many more minutes we have. I'm going to go for one more question. I don't have the time clock, so if you have to interrupt me or tell me to wrap up, just let me know. I'd like to take Douglas's question. In the applications of AI against modern slavery, as a case in point, what do you most want to happen in 2021? What is your biggest hope and aspiration?
I can start with a very quick point here. By looking at what is available out there, I think in 2021 it's the right time to be aware of the technology that are in development, and try, before moving into developing something new, to coordinate with the existing work that has been done to avoid duplication, because we all have the same mission to try to eradicate this as soon as possible, and there is no place for missing time or resources in this fight. So that will be what I would really love to see in 2021, a lot more discussion and collaboration between existing initiatives and any new potential ones.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Catherine?
I just really want to emphasize that. I think that's a really good wish list, I think, for 2021 for the application of AI and also beyond. We are getting better in the anti-slavery, anti-trafficking space about collaboration, and bringing in people who we wouldn't normally maybe talk to about eradicating modern slavery. And this is why this kind of multidisciplinary approach is really important. So I think learning from others, being open, sharing, and avoiding that duplication and drawing on the work that already exists is going to be really important for 2021. So just to agree wholeheartedly with Adriana.
Yeah, and maybe just to briefly add, I think one of the main things, of course, we would love to see our pilot of the integration with the algorithm and Wikirate go well. That's something I think speaks for itself. But other than that, I think that 2021 can also be a great year for our engagement with the UK government. They're launching their registry. And the same goes for our engagement with the Australian government. How can they take it to the next level with how much they can prepare the assessments and everything that's coming out to work well with a system like that, what we're developing. So engaging with them on more of the granular items that can be challenging, that would be something fantastic to see in 2021.
Well, thanks a lot. Let me close with this. Innovation is about change. Innovation is painful. Whatever we do, as we're trying to do, we are going to attract resistance. Some people will even, or may, drag us in the mud, attack our integrity. I've seen that. I'm not following some of the questions being asked, but they could be also because of some of the debates being led within the GPAI, some debates on that. My request to you is whenever you feel brought down or attacked, it's very important that something at least I always do, is I think about the victims. Why this responsible AI for social good project is important is because, as Adriana mentioned, there are millions of people who are suffering from modern slavery. They deserve support. The work that we do is not in contradiction with the good governance of AI and the need to tame digital capitalism. So that's something I would like to thank you very much for your hard work, for joining us. Congratulate ICEMAI and GPAI for the great summit, and wish you all a very, very positive rest of the summit. Thank you all, and thank you for joining us, and thanks to all the experts.
Mesdames et messieurs, il est maintenant temps de prendre une pause. En attendant votre prochaine activité, continuez le réseautage en utilisant les brain dates. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a break. Before your next activity, why not book a brain date to make a meaningful connection?